Hello and welcome to the Deercast podcast with Tom and Harry. Well, hello everyone and welcome to episode 10 of the Deercast. We are very fortunate tonight because we've actually got our first podcast guest who volunteered themselves to come on. So without further ado, welcome to Jose Souto. For those of you who don't know who that is, then you need to go out and buy his book because it is the Bible when it comes to both preparing, cooking and presenting and serving venison. It's a book that looks a bit worse for wear on my bookshelf because I use it that much. So without further ado, Jose, welcome. Thank you very much for coming on our podcast. Thank you very much for volunteering yourself to come on our podcast. So first question, how did you find yourself as a deer stalker?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. The reason I volunteered myself, if you like, is I'm a great believer in spreading the love, if you like, and basically getting people to understand education. Obviously, I'm a lecturer at college, and the more people basically find out about what we do and how we do it and the reasons we do it, the better. So I'm a great believer in that, and that's why I've listened to a couple of your things that you guys have done. I've seen some of the tests that you've done on kit and stuff like that, and happy to basically sort of spread the love, if you like, and do that. How did I become a stalker? Well, normally most people know me on the field sports sort of side as a falconer. I fly birds of prey. I have done since my sort of late teens, and I've flown a whole variety of different birds of prey. I mean, my wife is a falconer as well and has her own falconry business. That's how much I basically into falconry. But years ago, when I moved up to Cambridgeshire, which is probably about 14 years ago now, I had a very deep-rooted interest in deer management, and because one of my good friends down when I was living in northwest London was a guy called Mike Collins. Mike Collins was he was the deer park manager at a place called Copse Hall, which is part of the Corporation of London near Epping Forest. And Mike was basically one of the deer wardens there, and he looked after basically the deer sanctuary, and he did quite a lot of the deer management on that sort of side for the Corporation of London. And he's a ranger, so what better person to learn about the countryside than him, and I met him one day through a friend who had got a carcass of venison from him, and we just hit it off. I love to learn from people like that, people that basically just know everything. I mean, Mike was sort of a mixture between a gamekeeper and a park ranger, mixed between the two, and he had a fantastic job. And he was always out and out in the countryside doing stuff. He could show you things. I learned so much from him, and he took me out on my very, very first stalk, which was amazing. I remember him taking me out at one point into some coppice woods, and we stood in this very ancient coppiced woods where there's very thin trees all the way up. The trees, every single tree had been coppiced. And he just said, stand there. And he said, can you see the deer? And I was looking through this wood and I couldn't see anything. I said, no, all I can see is trees. And he just clapped his hand, and it's as if the wood got up and moved. There must have been about 20, 30 fallow just moved from this deer, from this wood. And I was amazed how camouflaged they were. And another point when we were out as well, he sort of stood me by a tree, there was a small group of trees basically out into the side of a field. And he said, just stand here by this tree and don't move. So I stood there, and he sort of went round the edge of this wood, and the next thing, again, I had a herd of about 30, 40 running towards me that were racing out, and he knew they were going to run that way, and he just ran towards me, and they didn't see me. They just ran round me as I'm sitting there by this tree. And I just found that amazing, and seeing the animals, and his knowledge of basically deer management, which animals to take out, which animals to leave, why, the effects that basically certain animals were having on the actual forest, especially the ancient forests of basically Epping Forest. Some of the old hunting grounds of basically the kings and queens of England. the effect of like sort of like Monty's were having on that area, and it was very, when he pointed it out, it was very, very visible to me as to what was happening there and how they had affected, this invasive species had affected the woodland. So I learned a lot from him, but I never got a chance really to go out stalking myself. I mean, I'd go with him. I couldn't shoot because it's corporation land. I could just go with him and observe all the time. And then I moved up to Cambridgeshire, and another good friend of mine, a guy called John Meads, who's also a deer stalker and he's also an eagle falconer. He lived not far from where I live now. John and I have been friends for years. And John introduced me to a guy who many people on this Deercast will know, a guy called Julian Stoyles. And Julian is like, well, if there was a god of deer stalking, and a god of the deer world, like Julian is it. There's not anything that Julian Stoyles does not know about deer. In the wild, in parks, every species you could probably think of. It's just, Julian's just a mindful of information. I met Julian, and I just hit it off. I mean, I was very far away from Mike now because Mike obviously was still back down in London and I was up here. Excuse me. And me and Julian hit it off, and Julian invited me up to Holcombe, where he was the deer park manager there at Holcombe. And at Holcombe, he took me out. He showed me stuff. He took me on my first stalk, which I shot my first roe deer, which is downstairs on a little plaque on my wall. A really nice Norfolk roebuck, considering basically what Norfolk roebucks are. And I learned a lot from him. And then it's around about that sort of time that I'd go out a lot with him, and I'd use the rifle, the estate rifle. He taught me all the things about basically, gun safety and that sort of stuff. I mean, I'd used shotguns before, but I never really shot rifles. And I come to understand that the completely different alien world of basically using a rifle as opposed to using a shotgun. I think we were talking about this before. I mean, a shotgun is just you use it, you put it away, use it again, you put it away. There's no sort of love lost between shotguns. Oh, I don't think there is. But rifles are different. Rifles are very personal. And when you get a rifle and you have a rifle that's shooting properly and well, you become very reliant and confident on that rifle as to what it's doing. As soon as something goes wrong with that, it's as if your world has collapsed around you because you have no faith in that rifle anymore. And that doesn't happen with shotguns. I don't think, anyways. It doesn't happen, but I don't think there is. And unless you shoot a rifle, I don't think you can understand that.
No.
So I shot with Julian's rifle for quite a few years and helped Julian with coals, especially towards Christmas when we were basically doing the coals and prepping stuff. Then he moved from Holcombe to Houghton. And again, with Houghton, I helped him there. I used to go out into the woodland, basically, an area of woodland where we were basically, we'd cull in there, cull certain animals in there and stuff. And I learned a heck of a lot. And at about this sort of time, before he moved to Houghton, is when I met my buddy Steve Lee, who's the photographer on basically my books. And Steve and I basically were, when we first met, we were talking. The reason we first met is because a good friend of mine is Phil Vickery, the television chef. And Phil was a great, well, he was getting into stalking. He was just getting into stalking. Does a bit of shotgun shooting, getting into stalking, loves the countryside. And Phil and I became friends because of our love of it. And we sort of bounced, talking to each other on the phone all the time. He's still a very good friend of mine. And this is not the rugby player. This is the chef. Yeah. And he had the guy who was a photographer on all his books. It was a guy called Steve Lee. Steve Lee's a very famous food photographer. And he's famous all around the world. He's done stuff all over the place. And Steve's son wanted to go to catering college. And so Phil gave him my number. He rang me, came to the college. And just by sheer chance, I was doing my game seminars, which I've done every year since. And there's one coming up in this November. And there's another one coming up in January. Basically, and we cover all the breakdown of carcasses, and we cover all of the small game, large game. There's a lunch in the middle of it. So we were doing this. So I invited Steve to it, and he came to it with his son. And the following year, his son actually came to the college. He did 3 years with me. And Sonny is a very accomplished chef now. But Steve, at the end of it, Steve turned around to me and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I thought, "Well, yeah, I have, but I don't really know how to go about it, about writing a book." He said, "Well, you've got all the knowledge." He said, you need to look at it." He said, "Let me help you." So okay, so we started this journey together, and one of the first places
Then,
we started going out was Julian.
and so by this point, had you applied for your own firearms license, got your own firearms license by now, or were you still sort of
I
using
was
estate
I was
rifles?
in yeah, I was in the throes of basically getting it. I spent probably about 3 years going out with Julian, and Julian using Julian's rifle and going out with Julian all the time, learning from him. And then I put my application in. It was during the summer that I put my application in, and by then, I was doing a lot of demoing for BASC, doing a lot of demoing for the Countryside Alliance. Lots of people knew what I did and who I was, and so my application went through quite quickly. My firearms, the police guys, firearms guys knew who I was before I was actually applying for it.
And this was before you published your book, your Venison book.
Yeah, just before.
Yeah.
We started. Steve and I started. What happened with the books was when we first started, we considered basically putting an all-encompassing book where it'd have venison and all of the other game, and we called it Fur and Feathers. And when we started to work on it, and we started working on what's called a blad, which is a basic layout and design, we very soon found out that the book was going to be about 3 foot thick, with all of the information the way we wanted to do it. Because at the time we didn't have a publisher. What we were doing is we had an idea, and we had an idea how we wanted to put it together. I had the stuff that I wanted to go into. I didn't want to put together a recipe book. That's not what I wanted to do. Both these books are not recipe books. Anybody that's looking for a recipe, it's not a recipe book. It's a story of venison and a story of feathered game, with recipes in it, and I say to people when they get the book, I said to them, it's not a book, the recipe book. You've got to read it from the beginning and read all the way through it and read all the little snippets for each of the dishes, as to what they do and that sort of stuff, and then read the bit at the back at the end where it gives you the why we do what we do. So it talks about deer management. It talks about, basically culling and what needs to happen. It talks about conservation of ground and land and what would happen if basically we didn't have the shoots and the ground that we have. Yeah. It talks about all of that sort of stuff. And that's what I wanted. And when Steve and I started doing little bits and pieces, we started actually with falconry, and then we went on to the deer side. And then we decided to split the book up. And we decided to do 3 books. One was venison, one was feathers, and then the one that we had just starting work on now, which is basically fur, which is got wild boar, rabbit hair, and it will also have some venison in it as well. So that's what that's. Yeah.
You're answering a big question and we'll get onto those in a minute from our listeners. But one of the first things someone asked when we sort of said that we were lucky enough to have you coming on our podcast, someone said, when's his next book coming out? So I think by the sounds of it, you've just revealed that there is another one coming, but
there isn't. Yeah, there is. The only problem is that the big COVID put a right spanner in the works, and it did for everybody. On top of that as well, bird flu is massively affected the book, because part of what we're doing in this next book is we're rifle shooting on wild boar and the deer species that we've got, but with the rabbit and hare species, what we wanted to do is basically again have some falconry in there. So I've got things like we've got eagles and goshawks and other hawks basically hunting the old ways of basically bringing food to the table, and we're hoping to go out and do a lot of that. Well, obviously with all the restrictions on bird flu, we have my wife has here basically all her birds here at home. It's her business. And if I go trudging around the countryside with my hawk and then basically coming back here and bringing bird flu back here, we could lose everything. So I've got to be really careful about what I do. So that puts a spanner in the works every time we want to do that. So that, COVID and that had put us way back. I mean, the book should have come out next year, but there's no way it's going to come out next year. We've probably got another couple of years basically worth of work into it, as we've already started. We've done some wild boar stuff down in Shropshire, and we did some stuff with a friend of mine, a guy who's Josh, who's got the Shropshire Wild Boar Company, and we did some stuff with him because he's got some really good quality wild boar, really right back to proper wild boar. And he's got them in large areas of open woodland where we can take photographs from that. The problem is with wild boar in the UK is that to get photographs of wild boar during the day, it's like finding a goose that's going to lay a golden egg. It's just so difficult. So we what we're going to do is we're going to try and get as much of the photography that we need to on the actual board themselves within these areas, and if we can get some stuff out, then that'll be a bonus. But at least we've got the photography that we need for the book, because majority of all the wild boar that I shot in this country are shot basically late evening, and Steve will just sit there with the camera and get really annoyed because it's too dark to take a picture.
So, and is that like the main bulk of the work of building a book? Is it like actually going out and finding the animals and then developing the recipes from that?
People have joked that basically Venison was 8 years of basically good excuses to go stalking.
And when did that come out?
Venison came out, I think it's about 6 years ago. I cannot remember off the top of my head now. I think it came out about 6-7 years ago now.
2015, something like that.
But we spent 8 years working on Venison, and it was 8 years of stalking and going out, and you know yourselves, guys. You go out some days stalking and you see nothing, absolutely nothing, and other days you go out and you see loads of stuff. Steve kept having a go at me because basically we'd go out, see stuff, and I'd shoot it, and he wouldn't get a chance to take a picture of it. But then we went out, we did loads of stalks where I just didn't shoot. He was out there taking pictures. I remember on one particular day we were out row stalking, and we on the way out there, like we have long conversations on the way to where we're going, talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And he said to me that I need to just get some good pictures of the roebucks out in the fields, especially against the cut wheat, that colour, that beautiful colour they've got. And actually we some of the pictures, if you look at the roebuck section, you'll see some on some stubble, and these are the pictures that we took. And we stalked up on this roebuck that was on the edge of a field, and the wind was perfect for us, right? So we got right up close to it. I must have been about sort of 40 to 50 yards away from it, and I was standing dead still. I had the rifle resting on my sticks, and Steve was there taking loads and loads of pictures, and he was just to my side of the rifle, and I was on it, and I thought, I ain't going to shoot it, I'm just going to let him take as many pictures as I want. And it was a really, it's not a crap buck, but this piece of ground that I had, we had loads of bucks that had antlers that were offset, and it seemed to be a gene that was passing through there, and there was quite a lot of them, and I was trying to pick out as many of these as I could to improve the quality of what we had. And this particular one was one that I really wanted to take out, but he wanted to take loads and loads of pictures, and he got loads and loads of pictures, and then the wind changed and it winded us and ran off, and he turned around and looked at me and he went, "Why didn't you shoot it?" And I went, "Well, ask me not to. I can't win."
So I'm going to ask one last question before we move on to some of the listeners' questions, which is that, I mean, you're a very accomplished and well-known chef, and particularly within the game sphere. So did that come before you got into deer stalking, or were you as a chef and then got into deer stalking and then got into the game side of it? What was the sort of order there?
I am. So what happened to me is basically right back from when I was at college, the college actually that I teach at now. I went to college, and I had a very inquiring mind as a young man, basically as a chef, and I loved things that were difficult to cook, and I loved understanding about things that were not the norm. And so whenever I went into the library, because obviously we didn't have the internet back then, it makes me sound ancient, doesn't it, when I say things like that? It's not that long ago, kids. Not that long ago we didn't have internet, and I'd go into the library, and every book that there was there that had a section on meat, I'd be looking at the game. I'd be looking at things like bare hams and unusual things that were basically being cooked, and I'm trying to understand a little bit more about that. I also thought that from a very early age, I thought that a lot of the old recipes that were in there didn't suit the stuff that we had now. The quality of the game we have now, and the understanding of what we have, and our preparation of meat is so much better now than it was back then. That some of the stuff that they were doing back then, they were doing it for a particular reason, and that reason wasn't about. So, for example, in Queen Victoria's reign, deer stalking became popular because of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. They were going up to Balmoral and basically shooting stags, and then everybody else started doing that. Now, unfortunately, these stags were in the rut, and they'd bring them down, and the poor chef would get this thing just dropped on the table and say, "There you go, do something with that. Want to eat that tonight?" And he'd look at it and think, "Jesus Christ, these things are like, really
they reek.
They reek, yeah. They're, how could anybody basically want to do anything for it?" And unfortunately, these guys had to then do things like, they had to basically soak it in wine. They had to put loads of juniper. I hate juniper. I can't stand juniper. So the juniper has been the most overused spice in game cookery, right? And everybody seems to sort of grab for it. It's this sort of like comfort blanket, putting juniper into everything, and I just hate it now. I don't have any of it. Red wine, all these sorts of marinades, heavy marinades to marinate the meat. And if you go abroad, you'll see exactly the same thing happening there. If you go to Spain, you'll see lots of spices, red wine, but you also see things like citrus being going in there. And this is to tenderize the meat. And for there, it's slightly different, because in there, they didn't stalk animals. They're out there. The Monterey animals, right, are all very high in adrenaline, and the meat's tough. Yeah, so that they need to put that stuff into it. So nowadays, our meat is not like that. Game dealers, the good game dealers, the guys that I work with, I mean, Lincolnshire Game, Highland Game, the two guys that I work with there, they select their animals. They know what they're doing with their animals. Animals that are basically sort of the stronger animals are liked by their basically export market. In Germany, they prefer those sorts of animals, so that's where they go. Or they go into processed products like the sausages and stuff, where they can put the spices into to hide that meat, or basically not to hide it, but to make it edible.
Yeah.
And therefore the good quality stuff that we have that's stalked, the animals sitting there quiet, relaxed, bang, done. And that sort of side of it, I started to understand all this and see a reason for it. And as I went on as a young chef, every time I went to work anywhere, I want to know more about this stuff. I want to know more about what people are doing it. And then I went and worked abroad for a while in Spain. Came back from Spain, and then I went into the House of Commons as a chef there. And when I was working in the House of Commons, there was quite a lot of game being put on there, but they again were very, very classical with what they did. And I didn't like that. I tried to change a few bits and pieces, but by accident, I started having a knowledge about stuff that no other chefs around me seemed to have. It was just an accidental thing, and then it just got, I didn't understand why they didn't know what I knew, but I suppose I was in that world, in that bubble. And when I was a senior chef at the House of Commons, all the senior chefs were asked to do training modules for our junior chefs. And so you had to pick a subject and do a training module on it. And because of my knowledge on game, they asked me to do a game one. So I put together a little booklet with all of the species and the notes about the species. And then I did a presentation to the younger chefs, and a lot of the other chefs basically came, senior chefs came to watch it as well. Much to the dismay of mainly senior chefs, because they never put booklets together, and after that they all had to put booklets together. But I put this little booklet together and I taught them, and then that's how I then went. The college asked me to come and do one for them, because the knowledge at the college was very limited and very classical and very old school. And so I did it at the college, and that's how I got my job at the college. I was then asked to basically come into college, and then it grew, and I got a job. I did a sabbatical and went and spent 3 months working at the college, and then from that I then went to work there. Then I started doing the game seminars. The game seminars have been running at the college now for about 18 years. I do 2 a year, and I do bespoke ones as well. Through that, we're the only college in London that has a deer larder. I mean, I have a deer larder in the middle of London, not even 10 minutes from Victoria Station. And I can take, in that deer larder, we'll take basically 10 carcasses. And I'm not talking small carcasses. Yeah, Westminster Kingsway, yeah. Okay. So we have our own deer larder, and our own game larder, where we have basically whole carcasses. We put through that larder, we'll probably put about 35 to 40 animals a year for training purposes for the college, for the kids. All of my third years do a whole deer, head on, feet on, and they go from field to plate. We talk about everything from shot placement to bleeding, grollicking, reaction to shot, what happens to the animal, to right down to basically showing them how to take the feet off, the head off, basically cutting through the axle joint, doing the skinning it, and then basically breaking it down into individual joints, and then from the joints working down to portions, doing a cost implication on basically carcass. All of my guys have done that for the last 18 years. Everybody has left ours.
It is amazing what you do, and to be honest, we try and sort of keep these podcasts to an hour, but I think with you we could probably be here for I don't know 5-6, or I could be any for 5 or 6 hours. And
well, we'll do
ask
the
you
hour and then carry on talking with a beer afterwards.
Exactly, yeah. And what an amazing claim to fame, having a deer larder right in the centre of London as well.
Must be the only one.
Yeah.
In the centre of London.
There's no other catering college in the UK that has deer larder. No one. No one does game the way we do game.
Yeah.
Nobody.
And what an absolute claim to fame.
That's amazing.
We're very lucky that some listeners have sent in, and yeah, we do have listeners apparently, have sent in some questions, some of them more than others. So I think if it's okay with you, we're going to move on to a couple of their questions. Harry, do you want to kick off with?
Yeah, absolutely. So regular listeners to the podcast will know that when we have a guest on, we put a blast on Instagram and we say, write your questions in and we'll ask them, and we do. So this is from Ian Richardson, who I think is a very regular commenter, who you probably know.
Yeah, I've got to reply. Ian's my stalking buddy, so he's probably making life hard for me.
Oh, this is it. Oh, here we go. Okay.
He's made your life very difficult, because I think he's sent in 3 or 4 questions.
He's got a lot. Okay, we'll start with well, I don't know if this is an easy one or not. Probably not. He says, what's your view on plant-based food? And is it something you'll be including in your role as a lecturer? Are you going to be teaching it to your students?
I'm not going to scream and shout here and basically say that it's all wrong and we shouldn't be eating it. Plant-based foods are what's the word I can use? They're an evolution in food. Food, everything changes. There are fads in everything. What I am against is people basically calling it plant-based bacon and plant-based meat and all that sort of stuff. If it's meat or bacon, it's bacon and meat. Yeah, that's what it is. It's obviously it's another alternative to stuff that basically people can eat. If people don't choose to eat it because of health issues or that sort of stuff, that's fine. If you choose to basically be a vegetarian, that's fine as well. What I hate is when those sorts of people try to ram stuff down my throat and tell me that what we're doing is wrong. And it's, recently we've had this thing with Petra, basically, that has turned around and said that they're having a go at the NHS, where NHS putting venison on their menus. Now, I've been doing a lot of that work with Highland Game, of basically teaching the NHS about venison. And one of their things was basically that venison is high in saturated fats. Well, that's a load of rubbish. Everybody knows that venison has the lowest basically fat levels of pretty much any meat, apart from something like, I think, bison, or ostrich. It's a very, very healthy meat. It's a very easily digestible meat, so it's something that we should be eating more of. Would I teach my kids about it? Yes, I would, because I want them to know. I want my guys to go out and have an open mind about everything that they do out in the world. And if I didn't, then I'd be putting them at a disadvantage. We teach them about everything at work. What we are very or what I am in my teaching, a lot of the lecturers are, and I try to help them go, because I run the larder there. I run all the meat, fish and poultry that comes into the college. So it means that I'm very hot on the sustainability of basically the meat and the fish that we use. I'm very hot on the ethical production of basically the products that we use, and how it's been ethically produced, and making a case for product, i.e., for example, let's talk about roast veal, English roast veal. I'm a big supporter of English roast veal. I'm not a supporter of basically Dutch veal, where animals are being kept in the dark and basically to grow a tender meat. It's that's wrong to me. I'm very against basically pinioned guinea fowl, where the wing is cut off, when the animal's a chick, to allow it to be free range to benefit me. I'm against all that sort of stuff. What I want naturally produced, good quality animals. I'm a big believer in basically regenerative beef, so that I teach all about that. And yes, I would include it and I would teach about it. I wouldn't say it's a subject that I know a lot about. There are probably guys that know a lot about it more than me and are better than me. Do I cook it at home? No. My wife is, if she was on this podcast, I think she would be ranting more and raving more about it than I do, because she cannot stand the fact that these people basically just ram it down your throat. I was at the hotel and catering show last year, and I walked down. The show is actually split into smaller shows, and it's you just walk from one into the other. And I walked down to one end, which I didn't realise I'd walked in. It's all the plant-based meats, and it's a massive area, an absolutely massive area. And if you looked at it, you'd think to yourself, oh my God, this is taking over. But it's a very small percentage of what we do. The thing is, it's a sort of, if you like, it's a topic that's a bit sort of abrasive, and there are people that basically have arguments in it. So therefore, the media loves it. And it doesn't matter. It might be only 5 to 7% of basically people in the country that actually eat the stuff. It doesn't matter. That they hook onto it, if you like.
No, absolutely. It's a controversial subject, isn't it? And that's why people love to stir up the debate, as we have a lot of.
Yeah.
Well, and he's your friend as well, so he's obviously thrown out a grenade for you to jump on there.
I should be having words with Ian.
Giving you a hospital bath. He has also asked probably a slightly more favourable question, which is slightly self-deprecating. He says he likes cooking game dishes, but they always end up being served up like my mum's Sunday dinner, piled high, individual segments on the plate. For meat, veg, potatoes. What are the basic do's and don'ts for presenting a great plate of food?
The thing is, with foods, if I was talking about this basically back in the 80s, I'd be saying all you do is 2 peas and a slice of meat on there, because basically Art Nouveau was back in then, and minimalist on the plate was what it is. I mean, it goes through fads.
A little bit of balsamic vinegar, a sort of.
That's it, yeah, a little squiggle on the top, yeah. Or as we call it in this country, there's a thing called Mercedes, which when you put 3 bits on the plate, and it does the Mercedes sign on there.
Oh, really?
But there are fads. I think everybody has their own style of how they cook, and the style of food that you put on the plate. I'm very difficult to pigeonhole, because I tend to sort of do a lot of fusion food, food with different parts of the world, and I'll tend to basically put together. I mean, we've just done a leaflet for Basque on venison, and there's a few Oriental dishes in there, right? And there's a few Spanish dishes, and there's a few basically British dishes on there. There's a good mixture of everything. And I think that works in this country, because I think we are very gastronomically diverse in the UK. If I was in Spain and we were going out for a meal, there is no way that my family, if we were going out for a birthday or whatever, there's no way that my family would consider going to a Chinese restaurant or Indian restaurant. There's no way you don't go to a Spanish restaurant to eat. Here in the UK, if we all go out for a meal, we're not looking at going to a British restaurant. We're looking at going to Chinese, Italian, Spanish, anything else, because we are gastronomically diverse. We like the flavors of other countries. We're not scared to try that sort of stuff. I think, depending on basically where you are. I mean, I'm a great believer in basically, obviously, the meat part of the elements of what we put on there being the center of the plate. I also think that I like duos and trios. In other words, I like giving a customer basically a taste of different parts of that animal on one plate. So in a lot of what we do at the college, you'll see, especially when you have any of my dishes, you'll see a first class cut on there, like a piece of loin or a piece of haunch on there, and then you'll see a second class cut, which might be a bit of pulled venison in a bonbon, or a piece of venison breast, right, compressed and run into an epigram, or stuff like that, because I want the customer to enjoy and to taste different parts of the animal. And rather than look at a menu and go, well, I fancy that and I fancy this, well, you can have it together, because we'll give you that element on the table for you, on a plate for you to be able to taste. Don't pile the plate up high. If you're looking to impress, small amounts, nice flavors, clean flavors, don't go too heavy with sauces. Venison jus can sometimes be like treacle on a plate, and it just doesn't work. The lighter, as long as it's basically sort of the thickness of single cream, that's what you want basically on the plate to garnish, and not too much of it. It's not a gravy. It's a sauce that basically is slightly stronger, and it's going to work with the meat that you've got there, and it's got to work with that meat.
I always feared this might happen, but you're making me really hungry, and specifically really hungry for venison, which is, I feel guilty saying, because I'm sat next to Harry, who actually has just cooked me dinner, and it was venison for dinner. So I feel guilty on Harry's behalf. But, not saying there was anything wrong with dinner, but you're still somehow making me hungry, Jose.
It's not one of your recipes, I'm afraid.
Final question from Ian, and I should say thank you to Ian for submitting so many. He said, if you could choose one form of field sport, what would you choose? Deer stalking or falconry?
Oh, that's like asking who's your favourite kid. Have you got two? Ooh. I'm gonna have to take the Fifth Amendment on that one. I can't.
Oh,
I love both so much, and for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done falconry for a long, long time. I've flown a lot of different birds. I've had a lot of great experiences. I've travelled the world with falconry. Basically to Spain, America. Doing talks and stuff like that. And I've got some great falconry friends, really close falconry friends, who at the drop of a hat will do anything to help me. I've got lots of falconry friends that are also deer stalkers. Ian's one of them. He's a falconry friend, but he's also a deer stalker and a game shooter. That's a really difficult one to answer.
we'll let you take a pass.
Let me
on
off on that one.
Yeah. One of the other questions is, I think we sort of already addressed, and it's from Jim Bob UK, and he said new version cookbook, please, which I think we've already covered. So it's on its way, Jim Bob UK. It might take a little time for Jose to get there, but it's on its way.
No. I mean, Steve and I are on it. I mean, my good buddy, we've been together doing basically books now for many years, and we're out there. We want to do it. The only problem is there are hurdles in the way that unfortunately that neither of us can control. And it'd be wrong for me to try and rush it, because the two books that we've done, both of them become bestsellers. We've got over, I think there's over 35,000 copies worldwide being sold on both of them. And one took 8 years, one took 5 years. It's just, I want to do it properly. I don't want to rush it and just throw it together. And otherwise it's going to be a letdown for the people that basically have bought the other two books.
Well, I think you've also built the bar incredibly high. I mean, the venison cookbook, as you said, alluded to, it's not just. I refer to it as a cookbook, which you said it specifically wasn't. That's sort of how I think of it. You have to forgive me. It is much more than that. As you say, it talks about the entire journey, the butchery, the processing, the reason why we do it, everything. And I think you're right in that the next book has got to live up to that sort of status, as it were. So yeah, don't rush it on our account.
No, and the thing is as well, with all these books, when Steve and I first started putting them together, what you've got to understand is that the way we put these books together, most game books that you'll see are put together with loads of pictures of dead birds and dead animals, because that's the easy option. Yeah, you can do that easily. Yeah, or you can take a photographer out to the middle of a deer park, take loads of pictures, and then that's it. There's your book. We didn't do that. We went out stalking. We went different parts of the country. We flew up to Scotland and spent basically a few days up in Scotland basically doing photography up there. Went down to the south of the country, went to Norfolk, went everywhere. And the reason we did that is because what we wanted to was we wanted to present a book that everybody would accept. Not only the deer stalking fraternity that basically love what they do so much, and actually we wanted to give them something that if they had somebody that was a bit, don't know about, take that, have a read of that. Yeah, just read it. I'll walk away. I won't talk to you anymore about it. You read it from start to finish, and you tell me whether that explains what we do and whether it explains it properly. And my wife's uncle was a vegetarian for many, many years. And the reason he was a vegetarian is because he didn't know where his meat was coming from. So he didn't want to eat meat that was basically badly produced. And he started eating meat again when he met me. And game was one of the first things, venison, because I was shooting stuff. He knew where it was coming from, so he started eating it. And when we wrote the book, I gave it to him, and he read it, and he loved it. And he was a person that was a bit on the seesaw, he didn't go one way or the other. But he loved it, and he described it, and as I've said to people before, as the books are like even the presentation of the books, it's like basically walking down a corridor with loads of doors, and each door is a particularly emotive subject, that you as a person don't know a lot about. And you look at the door, and depending on how that door, that outside of the book is presented to you, you're either going to go, nope, don't want to know about that, and put the hackles up on it, or you're going to be intrigued, open the door, and then depending on how the book's presented to you and how you read about it and what you're learning from it, it will make you open the door even further and actually go into the room and sit down and actually start to take it in, because you're comfortable in the way that it's being presented to you. It's not being gory, blood and guts and everything that I see. And there's stuff I could have put in there. On the Grollicking side, there is no pictures of Grollicking. It's explained, but there's no pictures of Gronkin because I don't want to put it in there. I don't want to put people off. I want people to understand in words what's happening, how it works, yeah, and why it happens. You know, on the Feathers book, there's a part of it which is basically to hang or not to hang, and that's a whole chapter on why the old ways of hanging and the new ways of basically thinking about not hanging, and that's sort of how the book has been presented, so that people who do not shoot, people who have nothing to do with basically stalking, who have nothing to do with basically deer, can take that book and will still love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I can sort of speak to that in the sense that there's one of the parts of the book which kind of dragged me in was a recipe in particular, the slow cooking of shanks, which as a deer stalker, I don't know, I'd always sort of cut the shanks off. Well, I'd either left them on my haunches, or they had therefore just been part of the haunch when I'd sort of cooked it, processed it, all the rest, or there'd been that bit I'd sort of cut off, stuck in the freezer and gone, I've no idea what I'm going to do with that bit, but I'll figure it out later. It was only when I came across your recipe on slow cooked, I can't remember if it's 5 hours or something in the oven, did those, and it has now become my favourite part of the deer, basically. And it was purely through flicking through the pages, and exactly as you say, so coming across a door that you sort of think, not quite sure about this.
I never tried that.
You honestly, as a recipe, you've got to try it. It is, and my other half is not. She's not a deer stalker. She's not a massive meat eater, but it is her favourite recipe.
Have you tried the epigrams?
No.
So that's another part that basically a lot of people shanks. I mean, like you said, it's a part that people don't know. The epigram is the breast. So basically, when you take the breast off either side, and you're left with the bones in the breast. And then you take the bones out of the breast, and what you do is you take that whole breast and you slow cook it, or you sous vide it. A lot of people have a lot of sous vides now, so you can put it into a vacuum bag and add a little bit of stock in there, some herbs, some aromats in there, vacuum pack it tight, and then put it into a sous vide. And if you're going to sous vide it, you sous vide it at probably about 75 degrees overnight, so about 14 hours cooking. And then when they come out, it's like a pork belly. What you do then do is you press it, you put a load of weight on it, chill it, cool it down, and let it wade until it goes really cold. Put it in the fridge and leave it in the fridge to cool down. And then once it comes out, take it out of the bags. You pull your liquid out, and your liquid basically you reduce down for your jus. Maybe add a little bit of chicken stock to it, and then you take the epigram, square it off, and the breast, square it off, and then cut it into little squares, so you get lovely cuts. Now, if you've got a really big breast, what you can do is you can fold the breast over when you cook it. And again, vacuum pack it, cook it. Now, when it cooks, it sticks together like a big sandwich. And then when you come to cut it, you cut it the same way. And then what you do is you cover it in mustard, flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, and then deep fry them. And when you cut,
what are you doing to me, Jose?
I'm so hungry.
But the epigram is honestly, venison breasts are normally minced, but try it. And if you haven't got a sous vide cooker, then just put it into a shallow dish covered with basically, and just cook it slowly in the oven. I mean, even leave it overnight in the oven covered in tin foil, so it doesn't basically, so you keep that in, but it's got to be really low and cook it really slowly. It's got to be soft when you go to push it.
The other one that I absolutely love, but you mustn't have too much of, is the tartare recipe. That is absolutely insane. I don't think you actually had that.
I'm shameful, never tried it, but
in very small quantities though. I will warn you, because for me anyway, it does bad things to you if you have too much of
it. A twist on that one: if you take the fillets and cold smoke them, and then cut them for tartare, they're even better.
Oh god, yeah.
Apologies to all our listeners if any of you were remotely hungry at the beginning of this, because you definitely will be now. So a new segment to our podcast that we were going to try, and we thought who better to try it with than a chef such as Jose was
such a caliber as yourself.
Was going to be, and because I don't think on this podcast make enough noise about venison as a meat. So we were going to ask you, as part of our new segment, if you had one venison dish that you had to eat for the rest of your life, as it were, or you were to pick your favourite, and that can be both the cut of meat, but also how you go about cooking it. And fun enough, it's also a listener question from Farm and Field, which is, if you could only cook one venison dish for the rest of your life, what would it be? So I suppose as a two-part question to you, what's your favourite cut of venison? And secondly, to answer that listener's question, if you could only have one venison dish for the rest of your life, what would it be?
As I said before, I'm a great believer in duos, or trios of basically cooking things differently. I tend to shy away from the loins, and I know most chefs will basically they just loin. That's what they use. They don't want to use anything else because it's easy. It's easy to cut the portions out of it. It's tender. It's a bit like a fillet steak. On there. I'm a great lover of the haunch and parts of the haunch. Basically taking the individual muscles out of the haunch and then using those muscles basically for dishes. I mean, we've got a big dinner coming up with I think it's the BGA, and I think we're using venison haunch on that. And what we'll do is we'll basically take out the top side muscles, and the silver side muscles, and pan fry them. We'll probably sous vide them and then pan fry them, and then slice them. And then the slices will go onto the plate like that. And I just think it's got a much better flavour. The rump is something that basically the D-shaped rumps that come off the haunches. Again, it's a piece of meat that is not used a lot. It tends to basically stay on the haunch. And if you take a D-shaped rump, it's like a rump of lamb. It's a part of the animal that works a lot, so therefore it has a great flavour. And if you cut it along the face, like if you're cutting rump steaks off of it, it's delicious. I do like what I call new season venison. I mean, we've just done it again. I've just done a recipe for the shooting times, and it's a new season fallow rump. Now, this time of year, when the fallow are in just before they come into the rut, if you're shooting prickets, the prickets have got a nice layer of fat over the top of them. And if you just skim off some of that fat, so you only have basically about, 5-6 millimeters of fat on the top of it, and then you score it well, and then pan fry it, so you get that sort of, it renders down slightly, you get a crispy edge on the outside of it, and then sear the meat into it, and then put it in the oven for about 6 to 8 minutes. It gives you a phenomenally good tasting piece of meat, and I never tire from eating that piece of meat. It's a lovely piece of meat to eat, with roasted tomatoes, or basically courgettes that have been basically cooked on a griddle or something like that. It's delicious. The haunch is one of those things that it keeps on giving. It has first and second class cuts, like you said, the shank, and you've got basically steaks out of there. And I would even go as far as to say to people, I hate it when I see venison sirloin steaks on a menu, or because they've cut steaks out of the loin and then called them a venison sirloin. There's no such thing as a venison sirloin. There's only one sirloin, and that comes from a piece of beef. And that's the only one. There's no other such thing. And the only reason that happened is because Henry VIII had a loin of beef brought forward, and he united it. So that's why we call it a sirloin. So there is no such thing as that. A loin of and it's not a fillet, it's a loin. A loin or an eye loin. It's not a fillet. A lot of chefs, basically, I did a competition this year, the National Chef of the Year competition, and I judged it for the Craft Guild of Chefs. And I was judging the main course dishes, and it frightened me that how many good quality chefs didn't know terminology of basically venison. They had people that basically were talking about saddles of venison. Well, a saddle of venison is a whole piece. It's not an individual portion, but they were calling it a saddle, and what they were talking about was a loin. And so things like that, but the haunch, I would say, is one of my favorite cuts. The haunch, and the second class cuts would have to be something like the breast. The breast is, so many things you can do with that. You can pull it, you can make bonbons out of it, you can pull it and put it with a jus and basically put it into burgers. It's venison is a very, very it's a meat that it's got lots of possibilities, loads of possibilities, and we're only just starting to scratch the surface on it and what we can do with it.
Yeah. And sorry, excuse my ignorance, the difference between a loin and a fillet is what?
So the fillet, a true fillet, only comes from the inside of the animal. The two little fillets on the inside. So
the right tenderloins, I call them.
That's a fillet. That's what is a fillet. So if you have a fillet steak, then a fillet steak is that loin that comes from the inside. A loin is what the Americans call the back straps. Basically, come off the back of it. Yep. And an eye loin is one that's completely clean. But people call that a fillet, and it's not a fillet.
Okay. And what about a saddle? What would you say a saddle?
A saddle, basically, you get a long saddle. So a long saddle, once you've taken the shoulders off and you've taken the haunches off, and then you've taken the breast off, you're left with a large piece of meat. Now, at the top, starting at the top, where you've taken the shoulders off, that is basically the middle neck. And from the middle neck on a piece of lamb, that's where if you cut little cutlets out of that, that's where you get your bascots. Yeah, and then the bascots were basically what traditionally used for Irish stew. They're the scraggy sort of bits at the top, with a little bone. They're also called uncovered cutlets because you've taken off the shoulders, so you've uncovered them, at the top. Now, as you come down, you'll see that there's going from this end now, from the rump, if you're going up, you'll see that there's flat bones, and then all of a sudden you'll hit the arched bones of the best end. So that bit there, where you've got those flat bones, that's the true saddle. If you then go 8 bones up, that's the best end. Yeah, and then from that 8th bone up, that's the middle neck. So the whole thing is called a long saddle. Yeah, but the actual true saddle is the bit at the end. Yeah, where you've got that flat bone.
Right, got you. Okay.
So that's where the eye of the loin is thickest, is at that end, and then as it goes up to the top, it tapers.
And that's why it's the best end, because it's
the best end's a bit in the middle, and the best end's where. So out of the best end, you would get your guard of honours. Yeah, you'd get your.
That's like a French trimmed.
Yeah, French trimmed, but you basically fold them over the top like that. Yeah. You get your cutlets. Yeah, and you get an English cutlet or a French cutlet. The French cutlet is where you clean the bone, because the French, basically, when they used to go to dinners, didn't like getting their hands dirty, so they used to be able to pick it up, the clean cutlet on the end, and eat the meat off the end of it and throw it down. Whereas an English cutlet has meat all the way to the end. Yeah, we don't clean the cutlet off of that. That's what an English trimmed cutlet is. So that's where the cutlets come from. A best end, is, or a rack, right, is basically the 2 best ends. So if you look at it before you take it off the backbone, that's basically a best end. Once you take the middle out, the bone, the backbone out, you end up with 2 racks. Yeah, and then from those 2 racks, you get what's called a rack of venison, where you might have a 3-bone rack. Yeah, that would give you a little portion that you can put on a plate with 3 clean bones. Yeah, do it with lamb as well. So you get 2 of those to each side. Yeah, a lot of people, sometimes you'll see on the menu, you'll see a best end of venison or a best end of lamb. There's no such thing, because that's the backbone still attached to it. That's not a best end. It's a rack when you take both of them off.
There's so much terminology, isn't it? Yeah. It's just so.
And a lot. The funniest thing about venison is the terminology for venison. Majority of the terminology is split between beef and lamb. There is only one cut of venison that has its own name, and that's the haunch. And I couldn't find out why the haunch has its name. I think it's something to do with basically the back in medieval times, basically the way that things were named. But the haunch of venison is the only thing that only is derivative of venison. There is no other animal that is called a haunch. On a leg of lamb, it's a leg of lamb. It's either a long leg of lamb with the rump attached, or it's a short leg of lamb where the rump's been taken off.
So if we take it that by the sounds of things, haunch of venison is your favourite. If you had only one cut of venison left, it would be haunch.
It'd be a haunch because I could do so much with it.
Yeah. Would you have a particular species, just to add another element to this?
When I wrote venison, there was a section in the book, right, which was basically about the flavour variants of all the deer species, and we had it all worked out. We had a little table. We had numbers from 1 to 10, basically for flavours and all this sort of stuff. And one night I was thinking about this, and for about a week I was having nightmares about it. And in the end, I woke up one day and I was at the studios at Steve's, and I said to Steve, this bit here? I goes, I'm taking it out of the book. And he went, why? And he went, there's too many variables that affect the flavour of venison. Very loosely, and I mean loosely, if you start naming the basically different species of deer as to basically the strongest to the weakest, very loosely, sort of muntjac and red are quite strong, when you go on that. Then you've got probably roe. Then you've got fallow, which is sort of middle of the road, and then when you talk about sika and then basically Chinese water deer, Chinese water deer are very lammy, it takes on marinades really well. It's very light venison, and sika can be a very light venison as well. But if you then start throwing in the variables, so the variables are the weather when it was shot, what it was eating, time of year, whether it's a male or female, whether it's sexually mature, the temperature at which you basically keep the carcass once it's basically been killed, how long you keep the carcass for. All these things are variables. The age of the carcass, the time of year it's been shot, these are all variables that affect the flavour of the meat. So you cannot be tailored to it. Best eating venison is 18 months to 2 years old, right? And animals shot at certain times of the year. At the moment, sorrels and basically, young fallow, fantastic. All the young bucks, absolutely prime eating venison. Now we're starting to get into the rut, right? And all the old boys, give them a wide berth. I mean, basically, and then not until the end of the season, and then once the end of the rutting season's happened, if we've not had a bad winter and there's a lot of food about, and those animals start to pick up again, then you're going to get a good quality venison again. But it's knowing at what times and when these animals are basically. The variables are ridiculous for that sort of thing. I shoot a lot of Munties, roe, and fallow. And so therefore I like fallow. I do like fallow because I think fallows are very easy to eat venison, and it's very difficult to get bad fallow. Even when they're rutting, they're not as bad as some of the others. So I think it's quite an easy to eat meat, and it's a big carcass. As a chef, I can get lots of portions out of it. So roe I think is that's another level. I mean, I think roe's lovely. I mean, I really like. The other thing about roe is the loins out of a roe are very tender. They're really tender in comparison to some of the other deer. And so that's the only loin I'll use for things like carpaccios and tartars, because it is so tender. I tend to stay away from doing that from other deer because they're not as tender. And again, with a roe, I'll tend to hang a roe in a carcass in the chiller for basically 2 to 3 days, and then I'll use the carcass. Whereas anything munjack, as soon as I pull the trigger and it's still warm, I'm getting the skin off. Because they're such buggers to skin. But all of the other carcasses, larger carcasses, I'll tend to leave in there at least 7 days in the chiller before I basically start breaking them down.
Yeah. So that we probably made listeners far too hungry. So we'll draw a line. Thank you very much for answering those questions, and we'll move on to our final sort of segment, if you like, of the podcast, which is Bobby's Bits. Which I think we've explained on all 9 of the previous podcasts, so we're not going to explain for this time. If you don't know what Bobby's Bits is, you need to go back and listen, or the reason behind why we call it Bobby's Bits, you need to go back and listen to a previous podcast. But for the benefit of Jose, it's where we essentially ask our guests, is there a piece of kit or equipment that you're hankering after at the moment, and if so, what is it? Or if not, is there a piece of kit or equipment that you could not sort of go without, basically, and if so, what is that? So Jose, feel free to answer if there's something on your wish list, and sometimes you never know, there might be a lucky sponsor listening who decides to get in touch and provide you with that piece of equipment, or if not, is there something that you've already got that you just couldn't live without?
Something that I'm looking at the moment, obviously starting with a new book, I want to start looking at it, is basically thermal imaging. I know there's a lot of guys that use it. I've played around with some of my friends' ones, and I've seen the benefit of using them, not to shoot at night. It's more to I mean, for an instance, there was an instance where a roe deer was shot, and it was a chest shot, and it sort of jumped and ran into this hedge, and it was in the hedge, and it was still moving in the hedge, and we were looking at it, and with the sights we couldn't see properly to be able to shoot it. But as soon as you got this thermal imaging out and you were looking at broad daylight, thermal imaging, looking at it, you could see exactly where the head was, and then you looked back through the scope and you see exactly where you needed to plant that bullet. So that was an instance where that thing was a fantastic bit of kit, and I haven't had a lot of experience with them. I'd like to basically have a look at them. I mean, fixed thermal imaging as well as basically the spy, the scopes, the little scopes that you use. I think they're a very beneficial bit of kit for a lot of people, especially shooting in dense woodland. I know that some of the more I suppose traditional stalkers will say that it's cheating. Well, I see it as it's another extension to a set of binoculars. I mean, you could turn around and say the binoculars are cheating. You should only go up onto the moor with a spyglass that's about 50 years old and comes in a leather case. But you've got guys with Swarovski, binoculars now. You've got guys that have got basically got rangefinders built into the binoculars. Rangefinder. Again, I've not used rangefinders a lot. I've never really used them a lot. Again, that might be something that basically, but the thermal imaging is something that bit of equipment I'd be without. I love my rifle. the rifle that I've got at the moment, and we spoke about this earlier. I've got a Seiko 75, an old rifle. I love Seikos. I've shot a few other rifles, but this rifle I've been shooting for years, and it's my go-to rifle, and it's shot everything. And I've had a couple of instances recently where I basically doubted it, and I didn't need to doubt it. There was nothing wrong with it. It's a lovely rifle, and it was sold to me by a friend of a friend who bought a new barrel for a new rifle that he'd bought, and he basically sold me this rifle, and I bought it, and I've still got the same moderator on it when I bought it. It must be about 17 years old now, and the moderator is obviously a bit older, but I mean it's still as good as the day that I bought it. It's a fantastic rifle. You have to have with stalking, as I was saying earlier on, you've got to have you got to trust the equipment that you're with, and to have a good rifle, that's half the battle. Good rifle, a good set of sights on there that basically, I mean, I've got a Steiger sight on sights on mine, and I've been through quite a few different scopes that I haven't liked, and this thing, I love it. It's just I look through it, it's there. It's a great scope, great quality scope. I've had it for quite a few years now, and it works phenomenally well. And even in low light, I mean, it's working phenomenally well. So that sort of thing. And the other thing I'd say to people is about, what people sort of ask me, what's your tip or whatever that you've got. One of my tips would be for everybody is shoot within your capabilities and the animal that you've got. We're very different in this country to other countries where you just basically look down the barrel of the gun and just take a shot at the body. To try and basically knock that thing down, and you're not very careful about it. I think we're more careful about what we shoot and how we shoot it, because obviously what's been taught to us, any deer stalker that's been on the DCS1 or DCS2, to basically to make sure that you're going to hit the animal in the place that's going to knock it down to the ground. And I would say to people, that especially if you're a recreational stalker and you're out there, maybe going out once a month, you go out, or once every couple of months, shoot within the parameters of what you're comfortable with. Don't go and try and take outlandish shots that, number one, are going to get you into trouble. Two is basically not good for the animal, because you're not going to knock it down. It's going to be basically running off injured. And that should kill you. I mean, if you shoot an animal and it runs off, and it happens to all of us, a very old deer stalker said to me once, I was getting a bit cocky, and I had a rifle that I'd been shooting with, and I'd knocked everything down, and I said I'd never foul shot a deer in all the years that I'd been shooting it, and he turned around and said to me, "You haven't shot enough deer." And he was 100% right, because then the next time I went out, it happened to me, and luckily I got that, and I tracked it, I found it, but that's it. To just take a whimsical shot and shoot it and it run off and then basically not care about it, that isn't. I mean, I'd say to my students at college, when you're using a piece of meat, be careful with that piece of meat, be respectful of that piece of meat. That's been given to you. An animal life has been taken for you to be able to have that and basically put that on the plate. So you need to give as much respect as possible and do everything within your power to basically use that and not waste it. Well, the same thing needs to happen with basically when we're shooting deer. It's basically we need to be respectful of the animal. And if it's not right, don't take the shot. It'll be there another day. Walk away. And lots of people get buck fever and it's like, but no. Believe you me, been doing it for a few years now, and you guys have as well. And you just need to basically look at it, and if it's not right, don't take the shot. If you're not near enough, you're not confident, don't take the shot. It'll be there another day.
That is some very, very sage and wise advice. And I think, like I said earlier, I personally could go on for hours talking to you, Jose.
Yeah.
And
I think we might have to have you back. I mean, we've had
I still got lists of questions, but we tend to try and sort of end these podcasts after about an hour or so. So I think we'll draw it to a close, but we'll definitely love to have you back if that's okay. And by the sounds of it, you were at the Stalking Show last year, so hopefully we'll see you there again in a few months' time.
I'll be there this year. Yeah, I'll be there.
Excellent. Fantastic. So we look forward to having a beer and a venison burger or something with you then. But thank you very much for joining us, listeners. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for all your questions. And once again, just thank you so much, Jose, for not only coming on but volunteering yourself for this process. So thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.